Sechus Kiddushin Daf Ayin Dalid continues the Gemara's discussion of Yochsin and Psule Nisuin, people that are not allowed to marry into the general population. We have one Mishnah on the Daf, about a third of the way through. The Mishnah introduces the topic of whether the Psulim are allowed to marry each other. So until then, the Gemara finishes a discussion which is unrelated as to when people are believed to say certain things that they should have knowledge of. And then we'll go back to the Mishnah and talk about a beduki. What is a beduki and why is he called that? So let's begin. The Gemara has been listing things where people have specific belief that they should know about it. So the Gemara now talks about if you had two people in a din Torah dispute in front of the judges, the dayan, and now they've finished the din, and the psak was handed down, and they don't remember who got the psak. So is the judge believed to say, this is the one that I found to be innocent, and this is the one that I found to be guilty, meaning the one who owes the other one? So the Gemara says, yes, the judge is believed as long as the litigants are still standing in front of him. Once they leave, his mind goes on to other things. He's not responsible to remember, and therefore he won't necessarily remember and can't be trusted for that. Now, the Gemara wants to know, what is the case? Why do we have to trust anybody? Why don't we just see, whenever a court rules, they give a document to each of them with the ruling that applies to them. So let's just look which one has the document that says that he's considered to be free and he doesn't need to pay anything, or that he wins. So the Gemara says, no, we're referring to where they tore up the documents. So you don't have the documents anymore. So the Gemara says, why don't they just relitigate the case? They'll come to the same conclusion if it's the right conclusion. So the Gemara says, no, you can't just relitigate the case. There's such a thing as shuda didaini, which means that there is no actual prescription to what the psak should be. It's up to the judge's feeling of who sounds more believable or who sounds more correct or which it seems more likely occurred. In a case like that, you can't necessarily reproduce the psak the same way the second time, and it'll depend on circumstances, and since he gave a psak already once, he can't reverse it, and therefore we have to know what he said the first time. And so we have to rely on trusting him as to who he paskin is guilty and who he paskin is not. Now, next is, which child is Bechar? So who's believed to testify as to which of the children in a family is the oldest? So Rav Nachman says there are three people, the midwife, the father, and the mother, and each one has a different zone. The midwife is trusted as long as it is still in front of her. That's right away. After that, she's not trusted anymore. The mother is trusted for the first 7 days. She's the only one who's trusted. That's until bris milah. She's the one who is interacting with the infant all the time. The father doesn't really have too much to do, so therefore the mother is the one who knows the identity. And the father takes over from the time of the bris. At that point, it becomes his responsibility, and from then on, he is the one who's responsible for the identity of the child and of the bechar. Now, is he also trusted to say which child is the son of a grusha or the son of a chalutza as far as the halachos of kahuna? So the Gemara says that Rav Yehuda says yes, he's believed to say that, and the Chachamim say no, he has no trustworthiness on that. Okay, the Gemara now refers back to the Mishnah, where we had seen that a shtuki, according to Abishal, is called a beduki. Now, a shtuki is someone who knows who his mother is, he doesn't know who his father is. We discussed the halachos of a shtuki. What is the importance in the Mishnah noting that he's called a beduki, according to Abishal? So the Gemara says, perhaps the meaning is that beduki means that you check, and what Abishal means to say is that you check with the mother. You question the mother and say, who's this child's father? And if she says that it's a kosher, then you can assume that the child is a kosher because you trust the mother. Perhaps that's what Abishal means to say. Beduki, you can check into him. So the Gemara says, if that was the halacha that it's coming to teach us, it would be extra, because we already know that halacha. It's a Mishnah that appears twice in Ksubis, and appears coming up on the next daf. And we have a machlokes between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer against Rabbi Yeshua as to if you see a woman who's pregnant and they ask her, what's with the baby? Who's the father? And she says, it's from this person, and he's a kain, miyachas, he's kosher, he's fine. So Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer say, you trust her. And Rabbi Yeshua says, no, we don't trust her, because why should we? We don't need her word for anything. We know on our own that she's pregnant, and there's some issue here. So we don't rely on her. Now, but there Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shmuel said that the halacha is like Rabban Gamliel. But Rabban Gamliel is saying the same halacha, that you trust the mother to say who the father is, or to say what the nature halachically of the father is. So why would Abishal have to point that out here again? Why would Rebbe point out in this Mishnah that Abishal held that way. So the Gemara therefore says there has to be an extra Chiddush here. So the Gemara tries two attempts at what that is. The Gemara first wants to say that the Chiddush is her halacha and the baby's halacha. Rabbi Gamliel was talking about her halacha. Is she nival to someone that makes her puzzle to truma? If she had to be with a chalal, she can't eat truma afterwards. So she's believed to say that no, she did not. Our Mishnah is discussing the status of the child, that the child is not a chalal or a mamzer, and therefore it's an extra halacha. So the Gemara says that only works according to one Amir. There's one Amir who says that that if we establish the status of the mother, it doesn't necessarily mean we've established the status of the child, because we can only believe it le'inyan the mother, not le'inyan the child. So according to that opinion, you need an extra Tana statement to say that we trust her as far as the child as well as the mother. However, going to the opinion that you can't split the two, once you know one, you know the other. Why would I need those two halachas to be listed separately? So the Gemara says, therefore, according to that, you'll have to have another chiddush here, and that's that Rabbi Gamliel was discussing where it's roiv ksherin. The majority of the people around are kosher to her. She was a pnuya. She was a single girl. And there's no isser to most of the men around, and therefore you could assume roiv is on the side of saying that the child is kosher. If, however, she's in a rusa, then most of them are psuim, and the apostle make mamzeros. So there, perhaps I would think she's not believed, even if she says, no, this is from my aros, and therefore it's not a mamzer. Rava, so therefore you need the extra chiddush here. Says Rava, the halacha is like Abishal, and if we do assume that there is kashrus here, if you check the mother, you can trust her. Okay, now we begin the next Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses what happens when the psulim would like to marry each other. So amongst the list of psulim, we saw mamzer, nisin, kusi, shtuki, and asufi. Now, first of all, the end of the Mishnah, we identify a difference between a vade puzzle and a suffix puzzle. So a mamzer and a nisin are vade psulim. A shtuki, someone doesn't know who his father is. And a sufi doesn't know who either of his parents are. And a kusi are all considered to be a suffix. We don't know what their status is. And we'll explain why a kusi is considered to be a suffix. Kusim were the people that were resettled in the Shomron area by Sennacherib, king of Ashur, when he conquered the 10 Shvatim and moved everybody around. Now, so what is their halakha? So the Mishnah brings three opinions. The Tanna Kama's opinion is that all psulim are allowed to marry each other. Vade, suffix doesn't matter. All the people on this list are allowed to marry each other. Rabbi Yehuda says it's usher. The Gemara will explain they're all usher. What does he mean? And Rabbi Eliezer, who the Haggasus is Rabbi Elazar, says that only a vadai is allowed to marry a vadai. A suffix can't marry a vadai, and a suffix can't marry a suffix. If he's a kosher, he wouldn't be on the tzad. He's a kosher. He can't marry a vadai, and on the tzad, and he can't marry a suffix because maybe one of them is kosher and one of them is a puzzle, and therefore only a vadai puzzle can marry a vadai, a puzzle that could be mamzerim to each other, or a mamzer and an asin. Okay, so now we begin the Gemara, which focuses on Rav Yehuda's shita. So Yehuda said that it's usher, and he didn't say what, but he's referring to what the Tanna Kama said, that is mutter, which is that all the asurin, all the psulin, which the Mishnah calls asurin love bekol, and they are all mutter to marry each other. And Rav Yehuda says usher. So the Gemara wants to know what psulim is he referring to. So we have to try a few options here. Simplest pshat is that he's referring to the psulim which we said in our last Mishnah, which are, like we said, a mamzer and a sin, a shtukin, and a sufi. So the Gemara says if that's what he's referring to, then that means that's what the Tanna Kama was referring to, and the Tanna Kama said it's mutter for them to marry each other, and Rabbi Yehuda is saying it's usher. So first of all, why would the Tanna Kama say that? He already said it in the last Mishnah. Now, in the last Mishnah we learned mamzer and a sin, shtuki, and a sufi are permitted to marry each other. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is why would Rabbi Yehuda say it's usher? What's he referring to? Is he referring to a vadai marrying a vadai? Why should that be usher? They're both psulim. It's referring to a vadai marrying a suffix. That can't be what he's saying because that's the next opinion. That's Rabbi Elazar. So what is he referring to when he says that they are usher? So the Gemara is going to try a few opinions as to what Rabbi Yehuda means when he says that the psulim lavei bekal are usher to marry each other. Gemara's first attempt to say it's talking about a ger and a mamzeres. The Gemara says that can't be it because a ger is not puzzle lavei bekal. Usher lavei bekal is not what the Tanna Kama was talking about. Although we know that Rabbi Yehuda holds that a ger is not allowed to marry a mamzeres, it wouldn't make sense for him to be referring to that, because it's not, when he just says usher, he's commenting on what the Tanakama was referring to, and that's not what the Tanakama was referring to. He didn't say anything there about a ger. He talked about an usher lavei bekahal. Ger is not usher lavei bekahal. So answers the Gemara. Rav Yehuda says, no, the Tanakama was talking about a gioires. The Tanakama said, call asurim lavei bekal, it meant call asurim lavei bekal kahuna, people that can't marry a kohen. So a gioires can't marry a kohen, and therefore the Tanakama was talking about a gioires, a mamzer, and a sin, a shtuki, and a sufi. And the Tanakama held that a gioires is allowed to marry into all of those. The gioires is not called kahal Hashem and is therefore allowed to marry a mamzer. And on that, Rabbi Yehuda argued. Rabbi Yehuda said, no, the gioires is not allowed to marry mamzer, and that's what he meant when he said that it's asur. Now, the Gemara just discusses what type, when we say a gioires is listed as being a surim lavei bekal kahuna, what age of gioires are we talking about? Zamachlikes, if the iser of a gioires to marry a kahanim is when she converted above the age of 3, or below, even below the age of 3. Above the age of 3, it means she could potentially have had a bia that made her into a din zayna before she converted, and therefore the psul tikkuna would be that she has a din zayna. If she converted below the age of 3, no bia below that age counts as a bia, and therefore she can't possibly be a zayna, and the psul of a gieres tikkuna is midin zayna. So what type of kahuna, what type of gieres are we talking about here? So the Gemara initially wants to say that the Tanakama here, who's saying that this gieres is asur lavei bekal kahuna, is talking about even a gieres who is under age 3, because this Tanakama is holding that a gieres even under age 3, who's not a din zayna, is asur to marry kahanim anyway, and is asur lavei bekahal, and is going like that opinion, not like the opinion of Rishon ben Yochai, who says that the iser of a gieres on a kohen is only referring to a gieres who converted above the age of 3. And therefore, what the Tanakama's chiddush is as follows. And this is the chiddush over the previous Mishnah. Even a gieres below age 3, who converted below age 3, it is still called asur lavei bekal kahuna, and is therefore permitted to marry a mamzer. Now, the Gemara asks, why would you want to say that? Why don't you say that we're even including Rishon ben Yochai's opinion, and we're only referring to a gieres who converted above the age of 3. A gieres who converted below the age of 3 is not what we're talking about here, because that couldn't be included in the term asur lavei bekal kahuna, because she is permitted to be lavei bekal kahuna. So the Gemara says, no, we can't. That wouldn't make sense, because if you're going in this Tana and you're holding that a gieres is allowed to marry a mamzer, you're holding that a gieres is not kahal Hashem. If a gieres is not kahal Hashem, it doesn't matter if she converted above the age of 3 or below the age of 3. She's not kahal Hashem. She should be allowed to marry a mamzer even if she's converted below the age of 3. So why would we say that only a gieres who converted above the age of 3, which is asur lavei bekahuna, is mutter in a mamzeres? That implies if she converted below the age of 3, and she is mutter lavei bekal kahuna, that she's asur to marry a mamzeres, but that wouldn't make sense, because either way she's not kahal Hashem. Okay, the Gemara accepts that, but the Gemara says this rule doesn't make sense. You're telling me that anyone who's asur lavei bekal kahuna is allowed to marry mamzerim. So the Gemara asks that that's plainly not true. What would you say about a female almana, grusha, chalala, or zona? All of those are asur to marry kahanim, but they are still asur to marry mamzerim. They're all clearly bekal Hashem. There's no heter for them to marry mamzerim at all. So that rule wouldn't make sense. Furthermore, you have someone who's asur to marry a kohenes, a male ger, that is allowed to marry a kohenes, according to your rule, should be asur to marry mamzeres. But if you're of the opinion that every ger is not kahal Hashem, a male ger should be allowed to marry a mamzeres. So here you have someone who's permitted to marry a kohenes and a mamzeres. So this whole opinion for the Tanakhama doesn't make sense. Therefore, the Gemara adjusts the way we define this slightly, and this comes from Rav Nosson bar Hoshea. He says, again, Rav Yehuda and the Tanakhama are arguing about a gioires, whether or not they're allowed to marry a mamzer. But the rule, the way we're going to phrase it, is it's not that they're asur lavei bekahal kahuna, because then we'll have a problem from Amana Grusha Chalala, it's someone whose daughter is also to marry kahuna. That's what we're referring to. The daughter of a ger and a geiris who marry each other, according to one opinion, that of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that daughter is not allowed to marry kahanim. So the Tanakam is saying that a geiris, meaning someone whose daughter cannot marry into kahuna, and he's including anybody, all the psulim, their daughter cannot marry kahuna. That he says they're moted to marry mamzerim, and the reason is because a geiris is not called kal shem, and she's moted to marry a mamzer. That Rabbi Yehuda argues says no, a geiris is also to marry a mamzer. And now you have no kasha from Amana Gusha because their daughter is allowed to marry a kohen. So on that the Gemara asks, I still have a kasha. What about a chalol who marries a bas Yisrael? That child, if they have a child, it's a chalala, and she's also to marry a kohen. However, the mother is not allowed to marry a mamzer. So the rule you're saying for the Tanakama that anyone whose daughter can't marry a kohen could marry a mamzer is not true. On that, the Gemara says this is no problem. We're holding at the opinion of Rabbi Distoi ben Yehuda, who says that a chalal who marries a regular bas Yisrael, their child is allowed to marry a kohen. It's not called a chalal. And that's why the mother, the bas Yisrael, would be also to marry a mamzer. It doesn't fit in this rule. It says, okay, I'll change the case slightly and ask you the same thing. A chalal marries a chalala. The child is clearly a chalal, not allowed to marry a kahanim. According to your rule, the mother should be allowed to marry a mamzer, but it's not true. A chalal is not allowed to marry a mamzer. Second of all, the inverse of your rule is not true. According to what you're saying, anyone whose daughter is mutter to marry a kahanim, the mother should be allowed to marry a mamzer. So what about a ger who marries a bas Yisrael? The daughter is a regular bas Yisrael as far as kahanim are concerned, mutter to marry kahanim, and yet the mother is not allowed to marry mamzer. So the rule doesn't work. So therefore, the Gemara rejects this whole line of reasoning as explaining what is the machlokes between the Tanakam and Rabbi Yehuda. What does Rabbi Yehuda mean when he says that it is usher for the mamzerim to marry each other? And we're talking about something else. The argument is about different types of mamzerim. You could have a mamzer from an ish, which is chayve misas vezdin, or you could have a mamzer from somebody who is baal achoisa, which is chayve krisis. So the Tanakama holds both of those create mamzerim. Both chayve misas vezdin and chayve krisis create mamzerim, and therefore they're mutter to marry each other. Rabbi Yehuda holds no, only chayve misas bezdin create mamzeris, chayve krisis do not, and therefore a child of an ashes ish is a mamzer, a child of a baal chisa is not a mamzer, and they're not allowed to marry each other, and that's where he's saying usher. That's the case that he's referring to. So they're arguing over a chayve krisis. Is that chayve krisis child allowed to marry a ashes ish? Okay, says the Gemara, this would make sense, but the problem is we already have a Mishnah that gives us these opinions, other Tanaim, but the same opinions. Why would Rabbi have to teach me another Mishnah saying the same halacha? That Mishnah is a Mishnah found in Yavamis. Brings three opinions as to what type of unions create mamzeris. We have the Tanakama who's Rabbi Kiva, who says anywhere where there's a lo yavai b'kal Hashem, even if it's only a lav. Then you have the opinion of Shimon HaTeimani, who says that it's chayve kores bidei shemayim, and the Mishnah's halacha is like that. And then you have Rabbi Shua, who says chayve misas bezdin and not chayve kores, and that's just like Rabbi Yehuda's opinion here. So why wouldn't Rabbi just say Rabbi Yehuda is that way also? Why do you have to bring this whole new machlokes? Therefore, the Gemara says a whole new pshat here. The Gemara says it's actually all one tana. It's not a machlokes, and it's Rabbi Yehuda the whole thing. And here's what he means to say: ordinarily, a ger is not allowed to marry a mamzeres because a ger is called kal Hashem. However, there are certain types of gerim that are not kal Hashem. That's a ger amani umayavi. They themselves are not allowed to marry into kal Hashem, so they're obviously not kal Hashem themselves. And those are the ones that are allowed to marry mamzerim because they don't have the status of kal Hashem. And that's all Rabbi Yehuda means to say. So when he says it's usher, he's talking about a stam ger. And when he in the beginning says it's mutter, he's talking about a ger amani umayavi.